Okay, so today we are live with Frédéric Voltaire Bastiat for a debate about politics, capitalism, and stuff in general regarding the political atmosphere we're in. So, Frédéric, I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
I am Frédéric Voltaire Bastiat. You can call me an Austro-libertarian of that bent.
Brilliant. Okay, so as you wanted to have the debate, I think it's best you sort of describe why you like capitalism of sorts, why you endorse the system and stuff.
Just let's see. I believe that free enterprise is the best and efficient way to allocate resources. It promotes careful allocations, thrift, being wise with your money, all that. This is why I support free enterprise.
Is that okay? Fair enough. So right off the bat, careful with your money, you say?
Yes.
And is that applying to everyone, or applied to like whom? The capitalists, the workers? Who do you? Is this like all encompassing, or?
It's really all encompassing.
Okay. Well, is that actually true of the system we see? Is that an actual real life reflection?
Pretty much so, because you're pretty much on your own in the free market.
As in, being careful with your money. Is that something that has to? Does that apply to all of society, or is that applied to those who don't have much money, and thus they are forced essentially to be careful with it?
Yes, I think that's pretty much true about why you kind of have to be careful with your money, careful with the resource you're giving or accumulating.
But what I'm trying to say is that is one rule for the poor and another rule for the rich. Because if you're wealthy, you don't have to worry about the financial implications of what you're doing, which is why many a billionaire or millionaire can lose millions in a day if they make a mistake, but they'll never feel the effect, and their mistake will be passed on to the worker at the other end who loses their wage, loses their job. Suddenly they're paid less because of a corporate mistake at the other end. So that's just sort of like the baseline of the plethora of problems with capitalism. But in terms of freedom,
system is perfect or anything, because it's not. It's supposed to be a rather imperfect system, allow people to make their mistakes. And hopefully
it's supposed to be imperfect.
Yes.
That's not a very good sign. What's the point of having a system that says, oh yeah, it is imperfect? But do you see what I'm saying, though? Those with wealth can afford to make really costly mistakes and waste millions because they'll never feel the effect of it, and the costs of those mistakes will always be shoved onto the workers at the bottom end, because that sort of shows that the idea that you got your own accountability is false. It's just if you're wealthy, you can afford to do as you wish in society, and if you do make mistakes, then you can shove the losses onto other people beneath you.
Well, it's not exactly true, because most millionaires or billionaires do not want to lose their money, so they kind of have to be careful with that.
But
they don't there's a reason why people like Bill Gates or other entrepreneurs like John D. Rockefeller very resourceful with their resources, very intelligent how they handle their resources.
I mean, well, firstly, it's going to be people underneath them managing their finances, but secondly, they still lose, or it's more than just Bill Gates and Rockefeller. Like, there's billionaires and corporations losing money, and rather than them feeling any accountability for that, the losses are just shoved onto the worker. It's why when there's an economic recession, it's the workers on the bottom who had no real influence on the workings of corporations and the placement of the structure of capitalism facing the problems. It's them being forced into poverty to make the capital of the wealthy protected. I mean, is that fair? Is that the worker who did not choose to make the decisions of the corporate summit and stuff being forced to then suffer the consequences of that, because the wealthy obviously aren't going to just they're not going to say, oh yeah, well, I made a mistake, so it's my responsibility. No, like no one's ever going to do that. No one's going to willingly give away their power or capital. So the losses are shoved onto the workers and the poorer elements of society who are unable to avoid the loss because they've not got any power.
Can you give me an example of this happening?
Okay, so look at the 2008 recession. All these corporations and banks just mistreating wealth, trying to pretend there was continuous growth until obviously inevitably it crashed. But rather than the bosses of these corporations and these entities being held accountable, the losses and the lost money is then felt by the public. So the gutting of public services, the loss of jobs, the mass unemployment bust that you saw, the relocation of many jobs to other regions of the world. These are effects that the workers have to face, despite them not being accountable for the problem. And there's many more flaws we can go into of capitalism, but one of many major flaws is that accountability is not at all true. There's no personal freedom. Well, it's not personal freedom. Sorry, there's no what's it called? Accountability, because the mistakes will always be shoved onto those too economically poor to be able to fight back.
Well, the thing about the housing boom and bust in 2008, it was due to like a variety of complicated factors. I oppose the bailouts of Wall Streets, and it was mostly due to federal sponsor entities such as Fannie and Freddie. So I don't really see how that's really capitalism faults, but I really see, free enterprise faults, but I really see that as a more so failure of irresponsibility. Like under like a purely free market, those businesses would have failed. They would have, in fact, they'd probably be in jail. But since we live in a rather corrupt system, they didn't get what they deserve.
But you have to ask, why were they given the bailouts? Like, why was the why were the wealthy protected?
Because they're cronies. That's why they
cronies
bailouts.
Oh, sure. I'm definitely in agreement with corruption in the U.S. government. Like that's pretty much like the nature of government under capitalism. But why is there corruption? What drives it?
Just the reason. Well, the reason why there's corruption. People are often incentivized to cause their own destruction. That's rather the sad reality about the human condition, actually.
Well, I think it's a more immediate and obvious cause. Capitalism is about accruing more capital, commodifying all elements of society to make profits, and thus with that profit you get more capital. So the idea that the governments under capitalism will be influenced by these external factors and be molded by the wealthy who are seeking to accrue more capital is inevitable. While you have the capitalism, you're always going to see corporations acting for their own interests and influencing government to enforce their way, to maintain their power. And the free markets, the free market you suggest. Sorry?
I oppose I believe in a separation between the government and the economy for very good reasons, because I believe that due to governments interfering, they do distort rather important market information on many occasions, as we see this with the housing boom and bust, the Great Depression, the recessions, the dot-com bubble of the 90s. Like we can see this.
So you're for economic deregulation entirely?
Yes.
And do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I believe. Well, I don't. Well, more specifically, I believe that we should have I believe that we should have really good information that's not distorted.
Really, what? Sorry.
Like I believe that market information should not be distorted specifically. Like if deregulations will help, yes. Is freeing up the market. Yes. Is it getting rid of streaking the regulatory state will help the free enterprise function better? I will support that, because I don't believe in the distortions of rather important market information.
But what do you mean distortion of market information?
Um, like let's say for prices is a prices and prices is a good example of market information. If the government meddles with the price mechanism, is most likely going to lead to shortages and quantitative a decline of quality of the products. That's a more obvious example I can think of right now.
So you think that essentially what you're saying is that you think corporations should be able to operate without any sort of regulation or control from the government. They should be able to regulate themselves.
Well, essentially, you can say that.
So you think that corporations will, act in the interest of everyone else instead of just their own profits?
Well, the thing about corporations is, like big corporations, is that they over time become slowly insufficient. Like economically speaking, like ordinarily speaking, many corporations would be failing as we speak, but they are protected by special interest groups.
But in regards to the ideas of capitalism, the idea that you need to be always making profits, you need to be accruing more and always gaining and protecting your capital. Do you think it's a good idea for then there to be no regulations and for wealthy entities to just be able to operate how they wish?
Well,
we already can see the state of America as it is today, with barely any regulations in many markets and dismal outcomes. Well, it is true though, isn't it? Because the American, state of capitalism is one of massive deregulation, and we can look at the Reagan era policies that sort of carried through today through neoliberalism and neoconservatism.
Well, the thing is that America is like for the financial sector is pretty overregulated, along with
overregulated.
Yeah,
just not the case, is it?
I've spoken to people who were in the financial. I've spoken to several people who were in the financial sector and read several books about this. Like they all pretty much say that it's really overregulated.
But I'm asking you, firstly, that's not the case because they've got policies there that allow for economic freedom, which is why so much wealth is funneled up to the top. It's why you have so much wealth, so many people in poverty, and so many dismal infrastructure like healthcare, like education, like transportation. You're ignoring the fact that American capitalism has allowed for clear wealth inequality, for clear degradation of the system. I mean, you look at the if you let me finish, if you look at the corporations and what they've done to the environment in America and abroad, you have to ask, how is this happening? How have we allowed the planet to be on the verge of ecological disaster when there's no need for this to happen? How have we allowed for farming to devastate entire regions of the planet and cause massive local environmental devastation? How have we allowed for areas where there's appalling housing conditions, no access to basic functions of society, really poor or even non-existent water standards like in Flint in Michigan? And you have to come back to the fact that rather than serve society and serve the people, corporations are going to act in their own interests. So they're not going to care that workers are being starved or unable to afford rent or essentially put into dismal conditions because they've got more profit from it, and you don't need.
Sorry, let me expound to the mouthful of your points here. But the way I see things is say farm, like you believe that due to capitalism we see environmental degradation, but like say for farming, for many years that the government been subsidizing farming, and due to this farmers have to be forced to burn their crops. And also for Flint, I'm not really that well informed about the Flint, Michigan situation, but as far as I can tell, it seemed like a infrastructure problem.
And why is the infrastructure bad?
Just like you seem like you're just blaming just things on capitalism, but in reality, it seemed like a part of government failures.
Well, the system we use is capitalism. So yes, I'm absolutely going to blame capitalism. And indeed,
Well,
the situations are directly caused by capitalism. I mean, there's no reason for people to be missing clear access to water, but for the fact that under capitalism, profits matter more than people. Like, what wealthy person is going to give away their wealth, their capital, to help others when the system isn't set up like that? The government could quite easily, say, no, we need to sort this out. We need to get them clean water. But if that's not happened, and it's been 4 years coming up to that, there's not been clean water in one of the wealthiest one of the wealthiest countries in the world. That's abysmal. That shows you that capitalism will always, not care about the plight of people living under it, so long as the wealthy can maintain their profits, their control. And you can't really say that the environment is not being ruined by capitalism when it's in the direct interest of corporations to disregard it in favor of their own profits. We look at the commodification of the land, of resources, of just all elements of society, and we can see that under this system, people are going to actively avoid and remove regulatory standards to make more. It's why deregulating the market, the economy, is such a bad and awful idea, because you allow for corporations to act however they like with no regard for the world around them, purely to make more money.
That's not exactly true. Like,
it's exactly true.
Well, no, for privatization, I always view privatization of anything, or allow for any markets to intervene, will have any type of market freedoms in a particular sector of the economy. Always a good thing, because their incentives are different. They're more likely to preserve and add value to whoever they're trying to do. Like, let's say for example, for a business, they're more likely going to be friendly to their customers because they want their money. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I'm basically saying that the consumer is the master in pretty much in.
That's not the case under capitalism, is it? Because, I mean, like we've already said, look at the way wealth is distributed. Look at who controls society. There's no choice in this. You can't say as a consumer, you're gonna sort yourself out, otherwise we're not gonna buy your stuff. It's the other way around. You've got no choice if you want to sort yourself out, because all the corporations are doing the same practices, the lack of ethics, the mistreatment of workers. And if you don't want to buy our products, then yeah, fine, but you're going to miss out. And it's all very well saying that if it's like a toy or fast food, but when it comes to food in general, or housing, or transportation, you're going to have a harder time. You're essentially told, buy into the conditions that capitalism gives you, or die, basically, because if you don't want food, then you're going to starve. If you don't want to have a house, you're going to be homeless. Like, you have to look at the framework of the entire system and see that it's deeply, deeply flawed. We haven't even got into the fact that capitalism is built upon the theft of the produce of labor, the exploitation of the workers.
Well, I don't believe in the labor theory of. I don't believe in the Marxist labor theory of value for.
You don't have to believe it, but it's still true. I mean, capitalism still is dependent on the exploitation of the workers, the extraction of profit from their labor.
I don't see any type of exploitation chain, like, let's say, for ordinary system, for ordinary situation in the first world. I don't see any workers being directly exploited by their boss or entrepreneurs, or by the capitalists.
Of course they're exploited. Look at any corporation. It's the workers who are putting the labor in, and the capitalist at the summit taking the produce and then handing a sliver of that back to the workers. Without the workers, that corporation would not exist. Yet it's only a thin sliver of the corporation receiving the produce.
But the thing is, like, they kind of all have to work in their own way. Like being like a CEO in itself is a specialized task, while being like Um,
Firstly, that's not even technically true because anyone who's worked at, a McDonald's or a Walmart can tell you that the person at the summit of the company making millions is certainly not, paroling the stores, helping out and stuff, and has delegated
they're being they're
has
broke
delegated a team of people.
distributors.
Hold on, has delegated a team of people underneath them to do their work for them, to manage the finances, to order the stuff. Like, it's not literally the CEO of McDonald's writing out the checks and stuff and doing that work. He's delegated a team underneath them. But secondly, even if your CEO is this hard-working entrepreneur who's always around at the store and, really dedicated person, that doesn't entitle them to the fruits of other people's labor. The labor of the workers should not be exploited by the capitalist class.
But the thing is that the thing about the business owner or capitalists often provide the framework, the building, the space, allow for the workers to basically survive in this cold world, this world. Like, I think
why does the factory need to be owned by an individual? How did they acquire it in the first place? Where did their money come from?
either through pre-existing wealth or through savings.
Pre-existing wealth. Where did that wealth come from? Where did the wealth come from?
Well, like I said, either through pre-existing wealth, they either inherit it or they work for it for a good chunk of their lives.
So where did it come from then? If it's pre-existing, it must have started somewhere, right? If you don't just just appear with a factory, like the factory and the land the factory was built on and the resources used to make the factory, they came from somewhere. They came through that exploitation of labor, that theft. They didn't just get the wealth from nowhere. They got it through mistreating and abusing and theft of the land and of the workers. It's like all land, for instance. It has no original owner. It was someone put a flag in it, and it was probably stolen. America itself, built upon the colonization and genocide of the Native American populace.
Well, the thing is that since, you ever heard the theory of homesteading?
Of what?
You ever heard the theory of homesteading?
Homesteading?
Setting, like the libertarian, basically the labor theory of property, as libertarians often adhere to.
Well, I don't see. Well, what? Okay, go on. Describe.
You said the lands are most likely going to be stolen, but I can offer you a theory why that may not always be the case. Like you can acquire legitimate property by essentially mixing your labor into your property or through the unclaimed land.
That doesn't change that the state of the world today makes it so that the capitalist owns the means of production, owns the land, thus forcing the worker to submit to their conditions if they want to live at all. Like, the idea of freedom under capitalism is one of complete misleading and lies, because you look at the state of society and the worker is free, but if they have no money, they have no means of acquiring the things they need to live, because it's all privately owned by the landowner, by the wealthy. So the wealthy says, okay, well, you can, you'll have a wage if you come and work for me, if you come and let me profit off your labor. And obviously, it's in the capitalist's best interest to maximize profits out of that labor. So they're obviously not going to pay them what their labor's worth and just take the majority of their work and hand them a little bit back. So they've got just enough to afford food and maybe rent and maybe a car. And not even that, because, look at how many Americans are in poverty. And even leading on from this, look at the way America conducts itself abroad, where it's even more exploitative.
It depends. For me, it depends how long they're in poverty. How long do they have opportunities to get out of poverty?
It doesn't matter how long, because
it's
built upon the profiting and exploitation of that worker. It doesn't matter if it was only for a day or if it was for years. It's still exploitation if their wealth was acquired illegitimately. Do you understand this?
But it's more often than not, if you're permanently poor in America, you either made really bad life decisions or really bad with your money or resources.
That's not true.
But that's even by the Brookings Institutes. All you have to do is don't be permanently poor in America. Is don't get a girl, don't graduate high school. don't get a girl pregnant during your
That's
teenage
just
years.
no, that's not the case, though, is it? Because you got to look at the structures of poverty in America, the
Like,
lack of school funding, the dismal transportation system, the heavily policed areas that belie many working class areas.
the thing is,
To say, to ignore the entire context of capitalism, of the framework of America, and say, oh, well, it's all on the individual, is to ignore the conditions that capitalism creates itself. So of course, you're going to say, oh, well, it's not capitalism that's the problem if you're ignoring everything that's causing it to be a problem.
well, the thing is, like the thing is, there's pretty much underlying reasons why, like for the inner cities, for at least in my country, as far as I'm aware of, those inner cities are run by many, well, by many progressives, by progressive liberals, but they're not doing a good job of running their cities. Then, like a dismal state of transportation or the dismal state of school, all of them are pretty much I can say confidently the fault of their governments.
So how would you improve it then? What would be your solution?
How can I approve this?
What would be the solution to fixing the problem?
Fixing the problem with poverty.
No, with
poverty, schools, transportation.
Yeah.
Well, you may not like it, but you may not like my solution is like it's just to privatize it, or better yet, a more realistic solution is to pretty much cut the federal government out of the equation and allow the states, the local municipalities, to handle their own schools, because I do think that's a much better way to handle schools. There's always going to be a problem with public educations.
Public education is streets
to be for that matter.
Sorry,
compulsory. Pretty much everyone.
It's pretty diabolical. Really, you'd say the solution to the education system and transportation is just more privatization, because what good is that? That's going to allow for wealth to essentially dominate education and only the wealthy to have access. Like you can't look at American cities and say, oh, well, the problem is actually there's not enough capitalism here, when it's capitalism that essentially doesn't allow for the funding to reach them, allows for schools to be severely underfunded, allows for private entities to profit off the labor forces in the workers.
Is to just bring more tax.
No, not at all. My solution is complete abolition of capitalism. The idea that resources do not need to be privately held, because that doesn't benefit society. We can have a society where everyone has access to a fair, healthy, good life, where they've got food, a home, and we don't have a ruling class. We don't have that tier of society able to control and dominate the majority. That isn't fair.
Okay, so how will that exactly work then under this?
What do you mean? How would it work?
Under this communistic system of yours.
Communistic.
Well, that's what you're basically describing. You just seem like you're either describing.
Sure. No, I don't disagree. I'm umbraged with the word communistic. Communist is the adjective you're looking for, or socialist, or far left ideology, anti-capitalism. But there's nothing wrong with having a system in which resources are held societally, where workers come together and delegate and determine who has what based on the means, what people need. Like there's no reason we can't organize society to function in a way that benefits everyone, where no one is left starving, where resources are shared and people aren't just left to fend for themselves with clearly inherently unfair conditions. I mean, to turn the tables on anti-capitalists and say, oh, your society is unrealistic, right? Even defending the current state of society, and then your solution, which is making it even worse by putting in deregulation, making capitalism even easier for the wealthy to exploit. Because what do you think is going to happen if you just took away the tiny barriers that there are to allowing a completely free market?
The thing is, I cannot name a time period of history that the material conditions for the working class ever increased. Like even during Marx, time during the Industrial Revolution, he did saw like the material conditions of the workers increasing. Like they're not becoming more miserable; they're becoming more happy due to the fact that due to the fact they're able to buy more things, they're able to produce, they're able to do more things due to the fact they have more money in their pocket.
I mean,
more opportunity to do. Like this is that's one of the rather more of the more simplistic things about privatization or industrialism.
This is a misleading argument again, because you look at the state of the world prior to the Industrial Revolution, and chances are you'd have died from cholera or from a very string of other diseases and stuff.
Well, I'm trying to say that industrialization is ultimately a good thing, because I really don't want to work on a farm for most of my life.
Yes, but the thing is, though, the conditions in the Industrial Revolution were still dismal for most workers. I mean, yeah, things got better, but it was through the actions of unions and worker movements, not through capitalism itself. Like, if you look at what capitalism did for the workers, it was essentially, yeah, you're going to live in this factory, you're going to be completely dependent on your, the landowner, despite the fact that you do the labor, and this is benefits of society are going to go to us. If we had had a system from that point onwards that was fair, that was worker owned and resource shared, we could be much further ahead than we are now. And additionally, if you'd let me finish, we could additionally have, a fairer society where no one's had to starve, where we've not had to see mass worker exploitation in order to gain in technological progress. Like, you seem to forget that it wasn't capitalism that allowed the workers to have rights and to have fair conditions, or which we don't even have now. It was the efforts of worker strikes. All along the way, capitalism has tried to smash unions, smash the idea of left solidarity, because ultimately it's about making profit. It's about protecting capital. And the more workers are, start to realize, oh, well, this isn't fair. We're the ones doing the work, and it's a tier of society that's stolen the produce from us. That's the conditions for overthrow and for change. So it's in the interest of capitalism to hold back the workers, which is why you see America today with dismal working rights, dismal, non-existent unions, basically, no real left-wing politicians, not both main parties aren't left-wing, and you've just got a state of society that's just completely rubbish, basically. Just look at the state of America. It's the richest nation in the world, and it's got all these infrastructure problems, all this corruption, poverty. And that's not to say what it's built on around the world. I mean, you don't have to look at US foreign policy to show just what capitalism will do to your nation.
Well, the thing is, US foreign policy has nothing to do with economic system.
It's got everything to do with capitalism.
To address your further points that you made, that your system that you want will not work. For example, the example is for Jamestown. They did try to have a essentially planned economy essentially from the top down, but they end up basically starving to death. But until they decide to allow individuals to own their own private property, their own individual space, they become more prosperous. They became a more healthy society.
I mean, firstly,
more example is John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil. They know, like I said earlier, they know how to efficiently allocate their resources. John D. Rockefeller was pretty smart with his but due to antitrust laws, he was pretty much destroyed by that, which was unfair, because they did have better technologies, better ways to transport their oil. But
once again, firstly, that Jamestown example, you literally said in that from the top down, which is not even ignoring the key tenets of the system I would advocate for. We advocate for the abolition of class itself, the differences in society. There's no social order and hierarchy that we need. So the idea of from the top down and planning from the top is antithetical to what we want. Secondly, you can't have a worker-owned, societally united system within capitalism. You need it to be all-encompassing. So to have a system of isolated, a commune within a surrounding of capitalism won't work, because it's in the best interest of the capitalists to destroy it, as we see with America, where the minute a nation tries to not even go socialist, but just move away from pure capitalism, from deregulation and free market economics, the US goes and overthrows it, or places embargoes on it, because it's in the best interest of capitalists to protect their capital, to protect the system. To come on to the point you said about the Rockefellers,
policy is a bit more
if you just want to respond to your Rockefeller point, and then you can go. If the Rockefellers, they should not be making billions off the land that is not theirs, of oil that is not theirs, of the labor of every worker working underneath them. They can't have you can be as smart as you like. If you if you don't have those other workers, you're not going to go anywhere. So why is it fair for Rockefeller to then just take billions at the expense of everyone else? His fortune is made of other people's labor, and the fact is that you can't deny that the workers of the world make it possible for the billionaires to exist. The billionaires are nowhere without the workers, yet the workers are forced into poverty, into miserable conditions that we saw across we see across the world, and saw even worse years ago.
But the thing is, like it or not, it did give birth to the middle class, though. It did give birth to that.
That doesn't defeat what I'm trying to say, though, is it?
Well, I'm not. The thing is that there's a lot of. The thing is that there always, even though I don't really like the state of the current U.S. economy is rather troubling to me right now, but it really did give a lot of people a lot of opportunities to improve their lives, improve their material conditions. It doesn't really fit with your narrative right there.
But it's not narrative.
We can observe the quality of life in America in many first world countries, and even in third world countries who are slowly implemented more privatization, more individual freedoms. Their systems are slowly getting better, but it will take a while.
That's not because of capitalism. That's because of worker efforts. Look at the labor movements, the civil rights movements, the right to strike. These aren't things that capitalists gave the workers. These are things the workers prized off capitalists. You have to look at the antitrust laws, the state of unions in America. Very minimal progress was made because of the control capitalists had. Whereas compared to, say, in Europe, where there was less, it wasn't as right wing. So promptly the conditions have been better. I mean, not much. We still have problems over here, but they're less so than in America, because we're not as right wing as America. Meanwhile, Americans, you talk about opportunities, but it's a lie. There's millions of Americans today in poverty and unable to escape that poverty because, firstly, the capitalists do not wish, they need workers in those conditions to be able to force them to, have their labor exploited. And secondly, how are you going to escape the poverty when, your all your time is going into selling your labor to earn a living, and then eating your meal or sleeping or paying rent? You've not got the money all the time to do this.
It's called budgeting and save your money.
Budgeting. How are you going to do that on minimum wage? How are you going to save money to just become an entrepreneur? It's propaganda. It's lies.
It's not propaganda or lies. It's just, I'm just trying to tell you, it's not exactly. It doesn't really fit the narrative that you're trying to espouse here. I'm just trying to tell you that it's not going to be deterministic like that. It's not going to be determined or set like that, because class mobility or income mobility is still a thing here. It still exists.
It's non-existent. Non-existent. How can you honestly tell me?
There's a study published by the what's that organization?
Heritage Foundation or something.
Not the Heritage Foundation, but let's see.
Honestly, how can you look me in the eye and tell me on minimum wage, where your healthcare is privatized, so you need to pay into that, you're paying rent, you're having to miss meals, as many Americans do, to be able to afford your rent, and hope you don't fall ill, because if you do, you won't be able to afford medical bills. How are you going to tell me that is in any way a condition for anyone to live, and to escape that as well? How are you going to escape that with that amount of money?
Just Like it's really dependent on the individual. It's really
Oh,
dependent.
okay, so I'm asking you, how would you do it?
How would I do what?
So
How
you're on minimum wage. Maybe you've got family. Maybe you don't for the purposes of this one. But you're on minimum wage. Your money is going into food and rent, and you can't afford medical bills. You can't afford many like luxuries, if any. Most of your time is working because your minimum wage obviously isn't much. And how are you going to get out of that to become this pursue your opportunities like you said.
just like I said, like how I do it is just that I have to be really smart where I spend my money on. I have
So,
to be
no, so
really
I'm asking you how. I'm asking you how.
is basically okay. Basically you need to have like a lower time preference, basically, or
Lower time preference.
yeah.
Okay, so how much is the minimum wage in your state?
Minimum wage, as far as I'm aware, is like $7.25 per hour, but that's not.
$7.25. So that's not only is that below the living wage already, but how many hours would you say the average person in your state works? Or how many hours would you, if you're in this situation, be working a week?
Maybe like 40 hours.
40 hours a week. Okay. 725 times 40 is 7 times 4 is 28, so that's 280. 25 times 4 is a pound, so 10. So that's by my reckoning, £290 a week. £290 times what 52 is. Let me get a calculator up.
Wow, you're really doing this right now?
Yeah, sure. No, I'm doing this. $15,000 a year. How much money do you think it costs to pay your rent every year? How much do you think your landlord's going to be charging you? Because you're not owning your own property. Because if you're on minimum wage, then that's not happening, is it? So how much do you reckon rent costs?
Average rent. I'm just gonna give you a random number. Let's say
Okay,
about.
a random number.
Okay, what about average rent for the year? Let's say for $1,200.
$1,200
Well,
for a
maybe
year's
actually
rent. Are you
let's make it
sure?
more realistic. Make it like 5,000, 5,000 for a year.
I would argue it's even more than that. To be honest, I think landlords are a lot more greedy than your.
I don't know. My mom, well, my mom is a landlord, and she spent a lot of money just to maintain her properties.
Well, I mean, I've just googled it now. It says $1,200 a month. So that's over 12,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to be generous, I'll give you 12,000 in rent. That leaves you, if we do some rounding up, because I'm nice, $3,000 to spend on food and electricity, and hope you don't fall ill. How much do you reckon? So that's what 3,000 divided by 12. Doing some quick maths is 2.5, £250 a month to spend on the rest of your stuff like food, electricity. How much is that a week? 250 divided by 4 is £62 and 50 cents a week, which a day is that divided by 7, which we'll round up again because again I'm nice, and that's $9 a day. You're telling me with $9 a day to spend on what food? How would your meals a day? It's healthy to be eating 3 meals a day. That's gonna and electricity, and hoping you don't fall ill. Where's the money going to come from to be an entrepreneur? Where's this money coming from? $9 a day you've got to spend.
Just
and bear in mind that that's not accounting for food and energy and transportation and life's hiccups, because you don't know what's going to happen in a year. There's anything could happen. You could break your leg. Like, do you see the flaws in what you're saying?
just that it's not it's really I understand what you're trying to get at. It's more difficult. It's more difficult to do that than said than done. But that but I'm trying to think here is that that it's really dependent on how fortunate you are, how careful you are.
Fortunate, that's the key word. You were right there. It's dependent on how fortunate you are, your fortunes. If you're lucky and you're born into wealth, it's going to be much easier to, be able to pursue education, to be able to have these ventures. But if you're on minimum wage, if you're in this situation where you've got barely anything to live off per day, not even accounting for crossing your fingers that there's no medical drama, there's no way you're going to be able to escape this. And that's the conditions the capitalists want. They want you, they need you to be dependent on the jobs they control and to be able to pay for the resources they own.
Okay,
you see this.
Okay, I found the study that I mentioned earlier. It's from Pew. It's pretty nonpartisan. Pew, that think tank.
Hmm.
Let me just find the page that was on. I have a book here with me right now. Sorry, it might take me a while. Actually, continue make your points and continue talk.
I mean, I'm not trying to say that the maths I just did just now is the basis of every single American or anything, but I used rough figures. I used figures that reflect real life, and yeah, perhaps there's going to be different situations coming up, and maybe some people are earning a little bit more than that. But the point still remains: you're not exactly going to have much left to spend on this entrepreneurship. We haven't even mentioned the time. If you're working 40 hours a week, and you have to sleep and eat, and there's transportation to consider, where's the physical time coming from? You're spending all your time earning what you can to be able to survive. This gets even worse if you factor in families and stuff and kids and stuff, and just the day-to-day things that happen per day. It's the framework that you're going off, the individual opportunities, is entirely based on luck and how wealthy you are. And for every rags to riches story, there's millions who were never going to have that opportunity. We also have to consider that people should not be in this situation in the first place. Never mind, is it fair for people to, is the condition there for people to make it? It's the conditions should never have even been there, because capitalism is based upon the theft of labor, the commodification of labor.
Well, from my libertarian and heartless capitalist point of view is that for people in poverty, I have to say this: you're either poor due to poor life decisions, and you're either bad with money. I feel bad that they're poor, but the only way to actually solve their poverty is just bring some type of production in their neighborhoods. Or
how are they going to do that? Do you remember what you just said a second ago, where they've got barely anything to live off per week? And also, if you're born into poverty, you're not going to have that choice. I think it's incredibly disingenuous to say, poor people just got there through their own decisions. When it's that's not the case of society. It's through the capitalist system. And even if someone is poor with money, is a bit of a lazy person, unpleasant and stuff, why should that deny them the right to a basic life with food and healthcare and energy and basic conditions of a healthy human life and human rights? What kind of society is it that we have if we're willing to say that, based on how I think of you, you should not have basic human rights?
It's not really about that. From a libertarian or capitalist point of view, is that that we see that people are rising up, as I mentioned earlier, income mobility is pretty high in America right now.
But it's not, though, is it? Because poverty is on the rise.
Well, let's see. Poverty. The last figures I heard for poverty was 7%. That 7% of the American population are currently in abysmal poverty.
I mean, also, you have to consider that poverty and poorness is beyond just where you're living below the living wage. It's also just the state people are living in, where they can't choose if they get ill, then they're going to suffer really badly from it because they can't afford medical bills. But additionally, you have to consider the state of the system. How more people are falling into poverty, the fact that wages are not growing at all, whilst the top tier of society is getting more and more wealthy. That's colossally unfair. And a second ago, you said, "Oh, from a libertarian point of view," like you just glossed over the human right element, the idea that people should have access to basic tenets of fairness and basic tenets of life.
It's not about fairness. Like I don't.
It's not about fairness.
I don't believe in fairness.
You don't believe in fairness.
Well, I don't believe in a more specific word. I don't believe in that kind of egalitarianism that you're proposing.
Why should people be denied their a right to a decent life?
Well, not the rights to decent life, but the rights that they have to claim that they don't have a right to. They don't have to, like, in the world, like, let's say you're born into the wild or on an island somewhere. Like you don't really have the life to you don't have the right to water, you don't have the right to shelter. You kind of have to build them yourself.
Is society like that today?
Like,
no is the answer, isn't it? Because like we're beyond the point of having to build little communities in jungles. Like we're humans, have society, and society is capable of functioning for all. So why should a tier of people at the top have the control of the wealth, the land, the resources over everyone else? Like, can you see where I'm coming from here? No one should be just told, "Oh, you're not going to have this unless you sell your labor to me." Like, do you see?
I view that kind of hierarchy to be justified, though.
Why is it justified?
That's probably like the most ideological disagreement that we have.
So you think hierarchy is justified?
It can be justified. Not all hierarchies are justified. Like
no hierarchy is justified.
Like I view the state as a unjust. I view the state as a monopolist, a correlation factors, and I view that as very incompetent. And I think we should radically reform. Like the meritocracy in America is pretty weak right now.
So how can you say then that, oh, if you work hard or if you make most of the opportunities, then capitalism will work, whilst also saying, oh, well, actually, America is not a meritocracy? And
well, I'm not saying America is not a meritocracy. I just view the current meritocracy to be rather weak,
non-existent. And also, I don't like the idea of meritocracies because I feel as though you should be entitled to basic human tenets of life, regardless.
Like by whom though? By whom? Like
by everyone. Society should provide for everyone in society. Everyone is a part of society, therefore everyone should be entitled to the fruits of society. Do you think it's pretty gross that someone can just say, oh, well, you aren't producing, therefore you cannot eat, you cannot have access to water? And if you want to look at it another way, I mean, look at what the capitalist class is doing. Like nothing. The capitalist class takes control of the means of production, of the land, of society itself, and then demands workers work for them, have their labor exploited, have profit extracted from them, and then give them back barely anything, enough to just about live on, and not even that. Like, do you see the hypocrisy in this idea that, oh, you have to work for your place in society, when it's quite clear there's a massive group of people, bosses, who aren't working for it? I mean, additionally, I have to ask, are you in favor of the state being abolished? The idea that capitalism should not have a state, that it should just be completely pure capitalism, like a sort of anarcho-capitalism in a way, which is pretty horrific, to be honest.
Well, I believe that the state of things should be like the current state should be radically reorganized and be like really inclusive and allow free enterprise to flourish. That's the system that I believe in. So
deregulation, basically.
Yeah, and lower taxes and all that.
So you want a pure version of capitalism, basically, where there's no limit.
Like a pure world of capitalism, that be like I try to use free enterprise, like free markets. That's the
private control, like the idea that no one should be impeding the market, essentially capitalism, basically. No one should be able to say no, that's not how you can profit?
Like see, like I don't like say I don't believe in like I believe in some type of prohibition on certain things. I believe that some immoral business practices should be banned. But
Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
But like the system I believe is pretty much pro-free enterprise, like pro-free market.
But sorry, I did it again. You go ahead. Sorry.
Say what you have to say.
Okay. By the way, if I cut you off, it's only because like I can be quite impulsive when I speak sometimes. To just say, "Oh, I was still going," and I'll let you finish. It's not intentional.
That's
fine. So, you say some business practices are immoral. You think there should be some prohibition. So, firstly, what makes you the actor to say what is unjust and what is fine? And secondly, how can you expect a system of this pure version of capitalism that we see today, where there's fewer regulations and impediments on the system? How is that going to work? Like you can say it's immoral to do X, Y, Z. It's bad to dump toxic chemicals into the ocean. It's bad to do terrible things abroad to make more profit. But someone else will say, oh, well, actually, these it may be unethical, but we'll make more money. We'll have more profit. You'll have more capital. And based on capitalism's pure, integrity, the idea that you'll be profiting more and more and making yourself more capital from your capital, you're going to lose. Your moral quandaries are going to be discarded for greater profits, as we see today, where despite the clear implications of what environmental degradation and corporate negligence and poor decision making has, if it makes more money, then they're not going to care. It's why capitalism can't be a fair system, because no matter how fair you want to start out and make it and reset it, profit's always going to ride above all. The idea of profiting off commodities has no limit. So for you to put a limit there, it's just it's just got a timer on when it's going to be evaded and removed.
Just like I understand your point of view on things. Like I just don't believe in your narrative of oppression. I reject that. I reject that because it doesn't describe the reality that I'm seeing. But that I see that the working class material conditions are increasing, and that the purchasing power that they have is increasing. It's sort of declining due to several complicated factors right now. Partly due to inflation and the Federal Reserve. That's sort of my things. Thing is, like, what I'm trying to say to you is that you may believe all these things. You may believe that people don't deserve to suffer in life. People have the right to water, the food, and shelter. But what I'm trying to say to you right now is that will never happen, or you will not get to that system, the system that you want. The closest system that you want that I can think of as of right now is a prison, because they do guarantee all the things you want. That you have food, shelter, water. You pretty much have like free healthcare on that. And that's the thing, is that what you're describing to me is that's the only institution I can think of that you want, that I can think of, that is a prison.
Well, I mean, the prison system is far less charitable than you describe it there. But secondly, I mean, I feel
that's kind of what you want, though. Well, not at all per se, but that's a system that's a system that you're describing to me.
That it's not, is it?
Because it doesn't sound as liberating. Like it sounds like sounds despotic to me. Like you can't just find like any you can't just find your angels who are willing to give all that stuff. We cannot just return to the Garden of Eden. Like we are.
There's enough land and resource and water. Sorry, you're echoing a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. seems fine now. So yeah, you can't. There's enough land, resources, water, etc., to be shared amongst everyone, and everyone eats well. The only reason we have problems in society is because of the private ownership of these resources. The fact that someone can just buy up all the land and say, no, you're going to have to work at my for me, so I can profit off you to have access to food and not enough food, to land and not enough to buy it, to healthcare but not enough to actually afford it. The idea of freedom is extremely contradictory. And additionally, to say, oh well, the closest thing you can think of is a prison, is to ignore the idea of anti-capitalism, of socialism, the idea that you can be free, genuinely free, to move anywhere, because no longer are you having to sell your labor to survive. The idea that automation can be used for the benefit of everyone in society rather than just for the elite few. Because, I mean, yeah, you can say all you like, oh, well, we've had technological advancements, but who's it come for the benefit of? Like, look at in the third world where, thousands of people are trapped in sweatshop labor or, factories, like, kept in abysmal conditions, all for the profits of Apple and, Samsung and all those corporations. Like, do you not see the contradictions in the idea that capitalism gives you freedom, when in reality it's built upon the subjugation and exploitation of the workforce?
Well, it depends what your definition of freedom is then.
The freedom, not to be freedom to be whoever you want to be, freedom to be able to exist depending on the private control of society. I mean, you can't say that the freedom to profit is, that's not freedom for someone else, because you're exploiting their condition, you're exploiting their labor for the benefit of yourself, you're exploiting them by forcing them to work for you based on the conditions of the capitalist society. And ultimately, like, you frame, socialism will be a prison, but the only people who are going to be having a worse quality of life, and not even then, they won't have a worse quality of life, will be like billionaires who own an island and now won't be able to. But even then, they're not going to be starving, or, they're not going to be treated like abysmally. They will still have access to a home and food. And yeah, fine, maybe they can't drive their Ferrari around their like $1 billion, mansion on a private like fields and stuff. But they're not going to be like denied the basic right to a life. Everyone's going to have enough and more than enough to survive. And you'll see society become more productive and happier as we utilize the tools of society to benefit everyone, so that progress is, equal. And no longer will you see like Elon Musk shooting cars up into space while people starve standing up in Amazon factories, or, sweatshop workers die and have to be prevented from killing themselves because of how miserable their lives are.
Like, all those situations are very very isolated. Like for China, the suicides you mentioned is like, as far as I am aware, is that those workers are less likely to commit suicide than the rest of the Chinese population, which is like, I think that what you just said is like minor point, but I'm sort of nitpicking here. But to say I think the larger point you're saying is that you're just entitled to things. To truly be free is that you don't have to worry about things. Am I strongmanning you here, or
yes and no? I mean, yeah, we should be able to be free as people. We shouldn't have to worry about starving because we haven't sold enough of our labor to a capitalist. That's not freedom. That's tyranny. That's the idea that if you're not making profit for someone else, you're worthless and therefore should be like in poverty or starving or dead. And the other, it's not under a non-capitalist system. You're not losing your freedom. You're gaining it, because your worth in society is just, you are a human being. Therefore, you should be able to eat, to have a home, to live. Like, do you see how barbaric it is to essentially place people at the mercy of a person's profits, but to be able to say, well, your job is dependent on whether Billy Capitalist can make money off you, and if he can't, then he's going to take his job elsewhere, and you're going to starve because no one wants to pay you. We're at a place in society too where we've got automation, where we've got you don't need workers in certain fields because a machine can do the job better. So actually, that should be a massive liberation point. That should be, yes, I don't have to work anymore because a robot can do my job. But instead, it's, oh no, I've lost my job. I'm I'm going to be at risk of starving. I need to find new work. Like, what kind of society is it where automation is an active threat instead of a massive liberation? And it's because of capitalism, the system that forces workers to sell their labor to capitalists.
Just like I don't see that as freedom. As from a like to like the way I see freedom, that you're not being held back. Oh well, you're not being. I believe in like a more negative idea of freedom here. More like you're basically freedom is like you're not being coerced into anything. For me, like I don't see anyone being coerced into the capitalist system.
Well, what do you mean by coerced? Because you're like,
basically the way I see coercion is that you're being point at the gun. You're being point at the gun. You're facing a gun at me. Like you're forcing me to compel these things. That's more like a libertarian idea of freedom. That you're free from coercion. You're free from force.
How do you think capitalism maintains its private property and its worker suppression? How do you think that you'd maintain that?
Well, let's see.
A police force.
Well, for the more statist libertarians, they believe that the government kind of needs to preserve and recognize the legitimacy of your own personal or private property.
So the police force, then, yeah.
Like for like a more reasonable libertarian would say that the government needs that the framework that government provides do offer and preserve private property. From a more extreme libertarian point of view, is that government is the ultimate threat to private property and property rights.
So where do you stand?
I'm more inclining to the former.
So you think that the government should recognize private property rights and thus defend it?
Well, they should recognize it and don't do anything about it, because they're most likely gonna infringe upon it.
But so if someone comes to your land and says, we're gonna your land is mine now.
I
what do you do?
Shoot them.
But they've got a bigger army, so they've got more, and they win. And so, how do you prevent that? You use force. You get, the police that exist.
Well, it's more
capitalism,
and thus like reactionary violence. Is more so like defending yourself, essentially.
But okay, realistically, right? I mean, yeah, you can be the best marksman in the world, but eventually there's going to be a larger force. The libertarian with a bigger army. They show up. Your land is now theirs, unless capitalism creates a force to protect itself, to protect private property, namely the police force. So for you to say that, I view freedom as not being coerced is, disingenuous, because the police force exists for a reason, to defend capitalism. And additionally, I would say that, if you go back to the main point I'm trying to make, is that workers are not free under capitalism, because they are forced to sell their labor to the capitalist for them to profit off their labor. Because if you don't agree to have your labor profited off, I mean, yeah, you can not agree, but you have no income, so you can't afford food, which is privately owned, because all these resources are owned by the capitalists, the landowners and stuff, and you won't be able to survive, and thus you'll die. And yeah, you can say, oh well, there are state benefits, but firstly, I'm guessing you're not in favor of welfare states, and secondly, if you're on benefits, you can't not work. Like, certainly in my country, they force you to go to the job centre, otherwise they cut your benefits, and obviously that's starvation. And if you go along to a job centre and find these jobs, you're having your labour exploited by the capitalist, even more so, because you're probably earning minimum wage, if that. So there is no freedom from the system. You are forced to participate in it, otherwise you die. And that's not freedom.
I'm sorry, how long have we been going at this?
An hour and like 10 minutes.
Okay, let's go. You want to wrap up around here?
Once you respond to that point, yeah, sure.
I don't like. like I have a very different moral and I have a very different framework than you, because like you basically you're basically it's basically up to you to take care of yourself. It's basically that you have to take responsibility for yourself. I This is why I reject your narrative here, because you have responsibility for yourself. You're responsible for your own actions. You're responsible how you allocate resources properly with your
But
life.
I mean, we've already
Say for my mom, for example, she didn't come, like, she basically like didn't have she didn't have any special privileges. Like, she didn't have anything, but she now owns like three properties, and I would say that she's kind of successful for that, because she didn't receive any kind of help. She didn't, as far as I'm well, she didn't receive help from anyone, but she was able to do that by herself. Like, she was able to take responsibility for
what was
herself.
so
She is in fact like a single mother of two children. Like, she's able
that's
to do that.
one person with it's probably some like where she's what she must be like 50, 40, that sort of age region, I'd imagine. um I guess, if not more, where you had a better system that gave you money for going to college instead of billing you and saddling you with thousands of pounds of debt. But as we've already established, you can't. The conditions we outlined, where you're earning, like, when you've got basically nothing to live off per day, the lack of time you have, the fact that the conditions workers face, from the start, are rigged in favor of the capitalist, because unless you're telling me that someone is going to be able to just make something out of nothing of themselves and not be participating in the capitalist system, like, you're ignoring all the framework around the system that makes capitalism unfair. Unless you're
Well,
going to tell me that being the society we
it's
have.
not. It's never for me. It was never about fairness. It's not about fair for me. Like, it's like it's not. I don't believe in
Equality.
I just don't believe in equality of outcome. I don't believe in that.
But it's not equality of opportunity, though, is
Like,
it?
it seemed like that you're describing that people deserve equal outcomes, but that's not. But that's not really. That's not true. That's not true for me, because you get
I've
what you
never
get.
I've never said it should be equal outcomes, but
Like,
that shouldn't impede the basic rights to food and healthcare. I'm not saying everyone should have, like, the same job and the same exact life, but that shouldn't stand in the way of saying, yeah, everyone deserves food, a home, energy, healthcare. But you're missing my point, which is that how can you say that in a society where some people are born into millions and some are essentially forced from the start of their lives to live in a system of poverty and never having enough and having no time that's not put towards selling your labor to make profit for the capitalist, how can you say that's an equal start for everyone? How can you say that's fair? And your answer appears to be, no, I don't care that it's not fair, it's just the way, which is rubbish. How is that a good way to run, or fair way to run a society?
just like the fair way to run society is that, well the good way to run a society is to allow for the freedom of the individual, to allow people to make mistakes, to allow people to do
But
that.
it doesn't, because if you make a mistake on minimum wage, if you, like, I don't know, break your leg and you can't work for a while, you've got no money coming in and you can't afford healthcare, so you end up homeless and die. Like, can you not see what I'm trying to say here? Like, and conversely, if you're wealthy and make a mistake, you can push the consequences of that mistake onto those with less money. And yeah, maybe you've lost $1 million, but you were a billionaire before. Meanwhile, the worker who's lost their income and job is now on the streets because they've lost their income. Like, you're ignoring the entire framework of capitalism. And why should people be able to profit off your labor? That isn't fair. That's your work that you've done, and the capitalist has taken that work and handed you a fraction of a produce of it. But
Well,
like
the
you said,
thing
you
is,
wanted to wrap up, so I.
well, the thing is, like, like I said earlier, I don't believe in the labor theory of value, or
How
the
can you disagree with it, though? So you think it's fair for a worker to have their labor profited off? You think it's fair for someone at the top to say, right,
like for me, like it's sort of like impossible to do. Like it's due to the fact that I have like a opposite time preference for I have an opposite time preference than my boss because I have a higher time preference for consumer goods, and he have a lower time preference for capital goods that he's more willing to save. I'm more willing to spend as of right now. So it's sort of like impossible for him to give me my full worth, you know.
Right, all labor is connected. Yeah.
Well,
Do you agree to that?
Well, I don't believe in the Marxists or the classical school of labor theory of value.
You don't need to look at the labels. Just, do you think that all labor is connected? Do you think that like there's labor that exists independently of everyone else's labor?
Well, I guess so.
That's not true. What labor is there that's not connected to anyone else's labor?
Man, I'm not really gave a lot of thought into labor, to be honest.
So, but you don't need to be able to, put loads of thought into it. Just, do you think there's any job, any role in society that is completely disconnected and unrelated and not dependent on anyone else's labor? The answer is no. Yeah.
Well, there's self-employment.
But no, that doesn't mean you're not dependent on other people's labor. Like, what are the tools you're making? For instance, self-employed, let's say you're a baker, you still need the food to be delivered to you by other people. You still need the food to be grown in other countries, the cooker to be made, the materials there. Every element of our society is made using other people's labor, made using the efforts of other people. So, with that considered, society should reflect everyone. So everyone contributes, so everyone gets something out. But instead, a capitalist tier of society takes vast quantities of wealth, holds it for itself, and then demands workers continue working for them in that exploitative relationship, and receives a fraction of their work so that the capitalists can profit and stuff. Can you not see the flaws there? If you can agree that, if you can see reality, but every single bit of labor is connected to another bit of labor, every single produce is connected with everyone's labor, essentially, the idea that a class of people can just exist with more wealth and more profit and capital than everyone else is wrong.
Okay. You want to end it here, and you want to end it on? I'm sorry. I'm just getting rather tired right now.
Yeah, sure. We can end it in a second. But
okay. I want to head to our final thoughts, our final conclusions or arguments, whatever.
Yeah, sure. I mean, all I'm simply going to say is, if you can see that all labor is connected, and that everyone, has basic human rights that should be upheld, how can you agree with capitalism?
Because as I said before, because I have not seen any system that has worked so efficiently and well, and also like it's also very there's also seemed like a very strong coordination or the Hayekian theory of spontaneous order. Like things just seem to just the work rather in sync with one another. Like people just know what to do due to the pricing mechanism, due to the profit signals. Like people know what to do, know how to do these things, because these mechanisms, these functions of the markets are important and are also too important not to be stopped by any government. This is why I still support free markets. This is why I still support capitalism, due to the fact that you cannot just plan society. You cannot just return to a Garden of Eden. You have to make do of sorts what you're giving, essentially.
And I won't go on for too long, because you said you wanted to end stuff, but I think to ignore the world around us, ignore the conditions capitalism puts onto the workers born into the world, and say, oh yeah, you've got to make the most of what you get, and life's just not fair. It's like it ignores just the conditions that life has. But like you said, you're tired. It's late in the UK, so we'll draw it to a close. Thank you, Frédéric, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving your time.
Not a problem. So to anyone else who wants these streams, wants debates, wants to speak to me, just message me, because I'm open for these conversations on anything really, not even political. Like I'll talk about anything. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the debate.
Okay.